Hi. So we just now completed creating the dynamic scenario using if and switch, right? So you learned how to build scenarios like this using both if and switch and some x, right? Now the same scenario calculations or dynamic scenario, you can do it differently using a couple of other functions. So let me show you that, and it is important that you know this because the one I'm going to show you is can work much faster. So let me first show you how do we create the same measure, same dynamic value using a different approach. So for that, we use two different functions. And those functions are one is has one value and another one is values function. Now, what is has one value? First, you need to understand what is has one value function. So the has one value function, let me just show you. Let me create a measure, has one value. I'll just added one. So has one value basically checks whether a filter has only one value or not. So if I create a measure that says has one value and it checks whether the scenario column has only one value, so that is what we are going to check. Now let us create a new pivot table and check this. So I created a measure has one value and now I'm going to create a new pivot table to test that measure. So data model, click OK. And then we use type here from the forecast base for rows. And then we use month name here in columns, right? Now let's create a filter. So let's go to the pivot table, insert a filter, and then we select the under all, we go to all, and then we filter the scenarios here. So now I will bring this, I'll bring this has one value measure that we just created here. Now it shows false. That means it is not just one value, right? If I select best case, then it shows true. If I select best conservative, then it shows true. Worst case, it is shows true. Now, if I select two, then what happens? It shows false because I have selected multiple. So basically, has one value checks whether we have selected only one, right, or not. It is again very helpful to control the slicer behavior, right? So you can say that only if has one value on this slicer, then perform this action, right? Now has one value you understood. Now the next function is the values functions. What is values functions? See, values functions, basically when you use values functions, it will return all the values from a table, but only the unique values, including blanks. For example, in your table, in a column, you have values like A, B, C, D, E, F, right? And then again you have F, again A, and then there is a blank. Now, what happens when you use values and this column name? For example, this column is, let's say, that region. And when you use values region, then it will give you a list of all the values from this table, but only unique values. It will remove the values which are repeating. Okay, now why do we use the values function? See, values function is again used to retrieve the unique values from the table. Okay, so we can store the unique values in a variable using the values function. So what is a variable? So let us, so there are a few things that you are going to learn annually now. So let's go to the power pivot. Okay, now create a new measure. And then I'm going to create a new measure that says dynamic forecast, dynamic scenario 2, right? Now let us structure this. What I want to do is, first of all, I want to check if the slicer has only one value. If the slicer has only one value, then I want to go through or iterate through each value and then perform the calculation, right? So for that, I use a variable. First of all, I use has one value here, has one value. I want to ask DAX, okay, check if this scenario table has one value or not. Now, what happens when I say this? Now, DAX will return whether it is one value or not, right? So if it is only one value selected, then DAX says, yes, that is true. If there are more than one value, then DAX says it is false. Now, whatever the outcome or whatever the result of this, I want to store that result in a variable. Now, what is a variable? So, variable is basically used to store values for the calculations. When do you use variable? See, for example, if I have two values here, one is I have two columns. One is an age column, another one is, let's say that, or let's say another example. I have a quantity column and I have a price column. So these two columns I can store in variables. For example, I can say that variable quantity is sum of quantity column. Okay, I'm just giving an example. We don't have any quantity column here. And then I say variable, uh, you know, rate equals, whatever the calculations we have done, rate. Okay. So then I can say variable price equals quantity times rate. So what I'm doing is, okay, may not be a right example because this will not work because we cannot directly sum the rate and quantity, you know that. Okay, but I'm just giving you an example to understand, make you understand what a variable is. For example, let's say that variable A equals 5, variable B equals 10. Now I can say that return me, when I use variable, I should always use this return command to get my output. Return me A plus B. So A and B, you will find that this A is stored as a variable and that returns in blue color, and then B also returns in blue color. So now if I do this measure will return me whatever the value is here, 5 and 10, it will return me 15, right? So what is the purpose of using variable? The purpose of using variable is that I can basically store values and then use the values for my calculations inside a measure, right? So I can define what my value is. It may be a number, it can be a text, it can be a date, anything. So I can define that the values first here, and then I can use the values for all my calculations. For example, I can say that, okay, variable COGS is, let's say that cost of goods sold. Okay, so we have a measure that calculates cost of goods sold. And then I can say that variable revenue is revenue. And then return gross profit. And then I can say that revenue minus cost of goods sold. Right? So variable is basically used to store the values and then use that inside the calculations and then return it. So let me show you an example of how do we use the variable to solve this problem. So I'm going to create a measure and then I start with a variable. So when you are using variable, you should always start with the VAR. VAR means variable. And then you should give variable a name. So here I'm going to give this variable a name like current table. You can give any name provided you don't start with a numeric value. You don't include special characters. So I gave a current table name equals. Now the current table is basically I want to test whether this table has only one value selected. So I say has one value scenario. Okay. This is my current table and I create another variable current item. Now what is current item? Current item is basically the values, basically the unique values we have in this table. So I use the values function to retrieve the unique values from the scenario table. So this gives me the unique values. So what we have done so far? Look at this. What first variable is a current table variable. So I created a variable called current table, and what the current table variable will store, the current table variable will store a true or false. For example, if the person has selected, if the user has only selected only one, then this will retrieve true. Correct? If the person has selected only one item, it will retrieve two. What happens if the person selects two, or if the person selects all, or if the person selects nothing, then it will be always false, right? That is the behavior of the has one value. So based on the selection here, you will get a true or false, and that true or false will be stored inside the current table. And here in values, it will store all the values coming from the tick column. So what are the values here? The value is best case, conservative, worst case. There are three values and there are no blanks here. So all the values will be stored in the current item. Now I will ask for an output. So whenever you are using variable, you should by default use the return command. right? So return. Now I will tell DAX what is that I want in return. Okay, I have told DAX, okay, store these two items. Now give me my calculations. So what is my calculation? So I say that if